Hello and welcome to this week's Shed Adventure. And as you can see, we're not actually in the shed this week. No, we're up in a bedroom, and I'm up to here in painting and decorating. But we're due a shed adventure, and in the back of a wardrobe, I came across something interesting. I thought most of the interesting things are in my shed, but no. Now look what we came across. Look at this beauty. Oh yes. What do we have here then? Can hardly squeeze it in the picture. Well, we have a British infantry officer's sword. How fabulous is that? The genuine article. And it's my sword. Now, the interesting thing, there's many interesting things about this sword, and we'll go into them, because at the end of this little video, I really want to focus on when did the British Army stop using their swords? When were they told to put their swords away and stop playing with them? Well, we actually know, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So I thought first we would just cover swords in general, and this sword in particular, as it's mine, and while I'm no expert on swords, I know a lot about this. So the first thing is, for those that know me, I'm going infantry sword. You were not in the infantry. No, I wasn't. So I actually have the wrong sword. So how did that all happen? Well, the young lady I was dating when I was being commissioned at Sandhurst, and it was the Sandhurst commissioning ball, she decided she'd go out and present me with a sword. She didn't know that much about the army, didn't know really much about what I was doing in the army, and went to a very good shop in London and said, "Can I have an army officer's sword?" And whoever was there didn't ask the right questions, or he may have asked the right questions and she didn't know. So she was given an infantry officer's sword. All very lovely. And this has been my sword for the whole of my military career as an army officer. And I'm very proud of it. It's caused me lots of problems, because I should have, because the units I belong to are considered as mounted units, I should have a cavalry sword. Well, what's the difference? Well, a lot smaller. And this basket, this huge edifice of a basket, is on a cavalry sword, a wire system, 3 sort of wires. It's a lot smaller. So the whole thing is less imposing. So, of course, for my whole career, I have annoyed regimental sergeant majors, inspecting officers, commanding officers by being stood there on parade with this monster in my arm, and it stands out, particularly if there's any other officers with the correct sword. And I've been told to get rid of it. I've been told not to use it. I've been haven't actually been disciplined. I've had stern looks and a few interviews without coffee, as they say in the army. And I keep using it, obviously, or kept using it, because it's my sword. So what are you doing with that sword? My sword, sir. It's the wrong type. Don't care, sir. My sword, sir. So here we are. Now, let's talk about some of the parts of a sword, and we'll get on to the history of this particular one. So if we start at the top, we have the pommel. We then have this area here, which is called the basket. The grip here is interesting. It's wired. You can see these wires to hold it together. This is fish skin, and the good swords. This is a good sword. This is ray skin. Is what that is. We come down here. We have a small leather washer in there. You can just see it. That's the original one, just to stop it banging when it is slid away. And we have a whole series of markings. We have a whole series of ciphers, royal ciphers. We have royal ciphers on here, and we have royal ciphers on the blade. We have an interesting mark here, because this is a good sword, and I'll explain why. You see that up here, there, that star with what looks like gold. It's actually copper or brass. So that's a proof mark. So why is that there? Well, it's to prove that this sword has been tested. It's a mark of quality. Why? Because back in the early 1800s, the British Army had a whole raft of problems with lack of lack of quality in their swords. Most swords, a vast majority of the blades came from Germany, a company called Solingen, and they produced blanks, and they went to all the sword manufacturers. So while many people think, I don't know, X, Y, and Z made swords, a lot of sword companies received their blanks from Solingen, and they're the quality swords. And for this to get a proof mark, one of the tests is from the horizontal to be able to bend the blade down 5 inches. So I would think you could do that and more. And it obviously comes back and it's undamaged. I think there's some other tests. They smack it into a piece of wood or something, or hang 30 pounds of weight off the end. But this is a seriously good quality sword. So let's have a look at some of the markings. So as I've said, when a sword is made, the year it's made, the reigning monarch is engraved on the sword. So this, we know, ERI is an Edwardian sword. Edward the First, Second, and Third used the same thing. So we'll come on to how we can date it in a minute, a bit closer to that. But it says ERI on it, which is Edwardius Rex Imperator. Had to write that down. Edwardius Rex Imperator is what it stands for, but it's basically a king's basket. Now, oddly, on this sword, now we know we've got a king's basket from the Edwardian period. I'm now looking at all the lovely markings on the sword itself, if you can see them, including the engraving and the nameplate. And we see something completely different. We've actually got all the ciphers of the Queen. So we've got a king's blade, and we've got a king's basket, and we've got a queen's blade. So what happened there? Well, I did some research and we found out. So we have the maker's name, famous maker. It says Hawks and Co. Piccadilly. Now, there were 2 sets of tailors. There was Jeeves, who did the Navy, and there was Hawks, who did the Army. And for the non-military, an army officer, even to this day, has to go and provide his uniform. It's not given to you, or it's not held in stores. You go to a tailor, a good London tailors generally, and as an army officer, you get your uniform. In the old days, that would also include a sword. That was part of your uniform. It's not required now these days. Actually, when I was around, and I think to this day, the army gives you a first grant to get you on your way, because we are talking thousands of pounds of uniform. But after that, it's for you to maintain and buy all the hats and the riding boots and the Sam Browns and everything. So we know that this is Hawks, and people from London or people might go, well, hang on, I've heard of Jeeves and Hawks, number 1 Savile Row. Well, yes, you would. So Jeeves and Hawks, so the Navy tailors and the Army tailors, at some stage 50 years ago or so, came together. I assume there wasn't enough business after the Second World War, and they set up a shop, number 1 Savile Row. So again, for those who know London, Savile Row is the posh road of tailors. All the doctors live in Harley Street, and all the great London tailors live in Savile Row. And Jeeves and Hawks have the great address of number 1 Savile Row. How fantastic is that? So this is a Hawks and Co. sword. So we know it's a good quality sword, and we can see that by the quality of the engraving, and we can see that by the proof mark. What else do we know? Well, we know that that Hawks and Co. didn't actually manufacture swords. So this is a Wilkinson sword. So again, we know where Hawks got their swords from. They were supplied by Wilkinson sword. I think everyone's heard of that. Very, very famous. So we know this is a quality sword. We know some other things. We also have a serial number written here, 8-9. We also know that Wilkinson sword used to obviously put their serial numbers on them, and they started with 0 and they worked up in order. So we know that this blade was 3,989th, and they still have records. Hawkes do, and Wilkinson sword do. So did a bit of research, rang up Hawkes and Co, or Jeeves and Hawkes as it is now, and they've nicely had all their record digitized, but somewhere there would have been a big leather tombstone somewhere, big old book that in some dusty archive that told you everything you needed to know. And we also know this says ERI, and we now know that this was sent to India for an Indian army officer. He was the first owner of this sword. Okay, so it still doesn't explain why we've got an Edwardian basket with a Victorian Queen's blade on it. Well, it all became clear. It's not a Franken sword. It came back from India. It says it in the records, broken. So whatever, don't know what he was doing, maybe dealing with something up the old Khyber Pass, and he broke his sword and sent it back to England. And if you didn't know, the reigning monarch gets their cipher on the sword. So any swords that were made since Charles became king will have his cipher on there, not Elizabeth cipher on there, Queen Elizabeth cipher on there. So it came back, and in the interim, the monarch had changed, and we now have a sword with a king's basket and a queen's blade. Quite odd. Don't know how many of those are around. It's not because it's a made up sword, or a sword that was made up of parts, because the archives state very clearly that it came back to be repaired and it was fitted with a new blade, which is, well, it's a big chunk of the sword, really, to be honest. But anyway, that's what they did. So there we are. We have what I think is a very interesting sword. My sword, infantry pattern. We know a few other things. So we know that it's the model of it, that this infantry pattern sword is a P1897. And that's a design, and that's 1897 when this particular design of sword came into being. Now, how do we know that? Well, this is something you can cleverly impress your friends if anyone comes up to you with a sword. If you can see here, that lip, so that lip is straight there. Here, it's rolled under, because this is the bit, when I put this on, that is the edge of the sword that would rub against my uniform. And clearly these edges, relatively sharp, all day long, that's going to wear your uniform. So in this mark of sword, the 1897 model, they rolled that edge just there. It starts there and it's rolled round to there, just that bit that would rub on the side of your uniform. So we know the maker, Wilkinson sword. We know the model number, the year, pretty much when that was made. We know where it went, India, and we know it came back, and we know it was repaired. So what about, when did we stop? When did the army officer stop using his sword? Well, we know, because it came out as a general order in the early days of the First World War. Sometime around November 1940, general order went out. You are to, for infantry, cavalry was slightly different, you are to return your swords, and you are no longer to wear them. So the British army officer just had his Webley, his 6-shooter, in his leather holster, and he no longer carried a sword. Now, why? Well, this should be pretty obvious, I think. And the first time research letters shows that this happened actually was during the Boer War. The Boer War were known, or the Boers were known for their fantastic shooting. Their snipers were second to none. And just as in the First World War, a young officer or an old officer coming out of his trench, waving this around, is an amazing target. The five, I'm trying to think of the five, the mnemonic for not being seen: surface, shine, shape, silhouette, sound. Maybe someone will tell me what they are. But anyway, you can imagine waving this thing. Come on, chaps. He's going to get you shot, because the first thing every English soldier was told and every German soldier was told is, if you see an officer, he is the first person to shoot. Why? Well, again, I hope it's obvious that the officer there is command and control. He has the briefing, he has the map, he has the binoculars, he has his compass, and he is there to lead. The role of an officer is to be the leader, is to be the motivator, is to show leadership, is to drive his men forward, give them courage, give them direction, give them orders, and achieve the aim. The aim being to generally initially take the first line of German trenches. He was not really expected to be part of the attacking force as such. So he would have his Webley, a 6-shooter, basically a monstrous thing, and he would have his sword. They are not attacking weapons in any shape or form. The attacking weapons is the Lee Enfield rifle that the average soldier would be carrying, 10-round magazine, and that had a range of, well, we talk about effective ranges and the reality of carrying a Lee Enfield with a bayonet attached to the end, running across a field. But in theory, on a shooting range, 300 meters, you could take down a figure 11 target. But a figure 11 target is a full-size man. You would be aiming for the head and shoulders of a German over a trench. And on the ranges, the targets don't fire back. So an effective range longer, certainly, than the sword and the sword arm of an officer or a Webley. Effective range of a Webley, in reality, take a pistol down to the range, having had a good lunch in the officer's mess on a sunny day, heart rate of a sloth, nice relaxing day, 30 meters, maybe, if you were good. In reality, having run across an open field, being shot at, being machine gunned, gassed, artillery and shrapnel everywhere. Any idea, forget all these movies, any idea of the old plucky officer running across the open ground, come on chaps, and taking pot shots at the enemy? Rubbish. He would literally be in the trench, and we'll come on to that in a minute. By the first time he would start shooting people with his Webley, because up until that moment, absolutely useless. He needs to try and stay alive, and he needs to get his guys up. He needs to get them running. He needs to stop them hiding in shell holes and get them motivated and get them into that trench. So what would happen when he did get in the trench? Well, he's got two things. I'm not quite sure what he'd have in what hand, or what I would have in what hand. He's got his Webley, 6 shots, not that many. He'd be facing a German infantryman. He'd have a Mauser. I think we had 10 rounds in a Lee Enfield, so there'd be a similar number in a Mauser, I assume, with a bayonet on the end. So maybe your sword in this hand, your Webley in the other. What happens when you've used your 6 shots? Well, your Webley goes away and all you've got is your sword. So you're hoping the same for the German soldier, and he's got a Mauser. What's a Mauser? And the Mauser is probably about the length of that sword, and then the addition of a bayonet on the end. So in theory, quite a long weapon, but you don't actually hold a rifle when you're using a bayonet at the end. If you think about the rifle stock with the trigger, you hold it there with the stock there, and you're obviously holding the front of the rifle, and you've got the bayonet on the end, and you're doing sort of that motion, that stabbing motion. Not that much range. You add this to a fully outstretched arm, I would think you'd be a match, or you might just about just about have the range on a guy with a rifle and a bayonet attached. It would be a close call thing. But now let's talk about the reality of a sword. This is a stabbing weapon. So if we look at it, you can see here it's solid metal. Give it some strength. The only blade actually starts there. So really, more than a third, but it's not quite half. So you can actually see where it's worn. So all the lovely engraving is worn out where it's been rubbed and polished and sharpened, and you can see it goes in here, and then that's quite a nice blade with quite a reasonable point. So this is a stabbing weapon. You are thrusting with this. You could obviously hack with it and take a swing, but you think you've got it's not that heavy. You've got a guy in front of you. His uniform is like ours. Heavy serge wool battle dress. On top of that, it's cold. He's going to have his grey coat, big thick woolen grey coat. He's then going to be covered in webbing, great thick webbing straps, webbing belt. He's going to have pouches. He's going to have ammunition, leather ammunition belt strapped round him. You come along and you take a swipe and hit his shoulder. Where's the sharp end of this? I'm not saying it isn't going to hurt, but you're not chopping his arm off. That's not a killer blow. Even full, the fear and I can't even imagine what hand-to-hand. I've got no idea what hand-to-hand combat is like. I cannot imagine. But with all the adrenaline flowing through you, in the confines of a trench, maybe, I don't think. Well, I know you're not going to do a killing blow if you swipe this into his body. And he all that time is stabbing forward with his Mauser and his bayonet. So you're going to take a stab at him. You're going to use this to parry. He comes at you with his Mauser. You can use your arm, this, to parry that weapon out the way, and then you step inside it. You want the weapon's length to be behind you, and then once you step inside it, you are looking him in the face. The good news is he's got both hands. As I said, he's got both hands on that weapon like that. You've got two things going for you. You've got this in this hand, and you've got a free hand. We'll come on to that because it may not necessarily hold your Webley. It may hold something else. We'll talk about that. So you have a go at stabbing. If you get in there first, straight in, every ounce of shoulder muscle and your whole body into his waist, into his up here, into his neck, into his eyes, into his face. Anywhere you can get a disabling or a killing blow, you're going to go for. If he's coming at you and you can parry his Mauser and his bayonet out the way, you step inside and then you smack him in the face. You punch him because your life does depend on it. You punch him like your life depends on it with that great big smack or a couple right in the face. And then if he hasn't got his helmet, you're really close now because you're in punching range. You'll grab his uniform and you'll smack that on his head as hard as you can. I'm sure we've heard about someone being pummeled into the ground. Well, if you can get that onto his head, you pummel him into the ground. And if he goes down, then hopefully you can finish him off with your sword. Well, that was the first few weeks of the war. But we were losing officers hand over fist. We've all seen great movies like The Kingsman and the story behind The Kingsman, that all the British aristocracy, all the people with money, had no sons left after the First World War to inherit. So they started the Kingsman organisation. Complete, obviously rubbish. Great movie though. The truth is there were no sons to inherit. They were all dead. And in the early stages of the war, we were losing young lieutenants and captains at a rate we couldn't sustain. And one of the reasons was because they were waving their swords around and they could be seen. You know, the effective range of a Mauser, it was a brilliant weapon, just as the Lee Enfield was. Put a sniper scope on it, give it to a few German snipers, and they would be told, look for the army officer, look for the guy at the front. And the way you can see him is he will be the guy waving his sword around. A Webley, you know, not quite so obvious. You get that close and you just look like another soldier trudging towards you. But anybody with one of these in his hand, you were going to get shot. Everyone is going to be pointing their rifle. Get the officer. And they did. And that obviously lost us all our command and control. So what happened? November 1940, order goes out, general order to the whole of the British Army in the First World War, fighting in the trenches. Backload your swords, home, stores, gone. And I don't know the exact date, but the order went out, and your swords were no more. So there we go. That was the last time we went to war with a sword, although I took mine to the Gulf War. Thought it would be good. Didn't use it for anything. Kent Peg. So then what happened? Well, poor old British Army officer he's got a Webley, and he's got 6 shots. So he jumps into the trench. Yeah, great. Guy comes at you. Hopefully his weapon's empty and he's trying to stab you, and you can stand back there, and from 10, 20 feet, bang. But 6 shots go very quickly, and then you are literally unarmed. So what next? And if you were fighting with a sword, what do you have in your other hand? If your Webley was useless, what else did you have? So things developed, and not very nice things develop. And what we'll do maybe in another episode is we'll start talking about them. So people started to develop trench fighting tools, trench fighting knives. So a knife, built-in set of knuckle dusters, so you could punch and stab. Some of this stuff was medieval. A medieval mace, a nice piece of wood with a big lump of knobbly iron on it. So when I'm saying what did the British Army officer have in his other hand if he was fighting with his sword, he would have something else. So not only would he parry the weapon and step inside and punch with his sword, he'd then be hitting you with something else. They were going home on leave. They were getting from the gym a nice rounder's bat, and they were wrapping barbed wire around it. They were getting a rounder's bat and they were sinking 6-inch nails through it and sharpening them. So you'd come up and you'd start clubbing people with that. So it was a horrible war, as we all know, and it's not like the movies. So this British Army officer jumping into the trench would look something pretty grim, because tucked into his Sam Brown, he would have a bayonet, he would have a cleaver, he would have a trench fighting knife, he would have a mace, he would have anything he could lay his hands on or adapt to help him kill the enemy. Because when that weapon went click and his rounds were gone, he couldn't stand there completely disarmed with no weapons. So he didn't. And this is where all these grotesque trench fighting equipment developed. And so what I think we'll do is we'll make some. We've got a few bits and bobs in the shed, and I'll knock up a few trench fighting weapons. I can go to the Imperial War Museum and see the real things, to be honest. I can also look at them online. So we know what they had, and we'll make a few. We'll certainly make a mace. I have a nice piece of metal that would fit a nice ash handle, and we'll make ourselves a mace. So we can imagine an officer with his Webley and his trench fighting tool, or his sword and his trench fighting tool, in there, armed for the brutality of the First World War. Not very pleasant, and it certainly isn't like any of the movies. Okay, I think I think that's it. I think I've spoken far too long on swords. So we know about swords. We know about my sword, and we know when the British Army put away his swords, and that was the last time that they saw combat. November 1940 on the Western Front. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm back off to finish my my decorating, and I'll be away up in Shed HQ making ourselves some trench infantry fighting weapons we can have a look at and a talk about, and be hopefully horrified at the brutality of what we as human beings put ourselves through. Super. Hope you like this episode. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I will see you very shortly. Have a lovely weekend. Bye bye, everybody.